Good morning. Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Again, we are studying the Intertestamental Period of history. We are on lesson number 13. We're going to do today, since we ended with Alexander the Great last week, here's what we've been through. We did the introduction. We looked at Daniel's prophetic view, the different prophecies in Daniel about what was going to happen from the Babylonian times down to the Roman times, down to the time of the coming of the Lord's kingdom. We talked about how we were going to study. Then number 4, the Persian Empire that lasted from 539 to 331 BC. We're talking about the Grecian Empire, which lasted from 331 BC to 146 BC. 146 BC is when the Roman Republic begins. And it's important to distinguish between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. They're essentially two different things. That the Roman Republic develops into the Roman Empire, which is a dictatorship. You have a democratic republic. Well, I will say a democratic republic. You have a republic, and then that turns into a dictatorship, the empire. So in that Grecian Empire, remember, family of Japheth, or Javan, the Greeks, enter into the ancient Near East history. Philip II of Macedon was the leader of that. That was Alexander's father. He was poisoned in 336 BC, assassinated. Alexander, his son, takes over, and in about 13 years expands the kingdom. Boom! It takes off. It is great. Goes clear to India. He's such a masterful leader and military genius, but he dies at a very young age. And what we're going to now study is the division of the empire after Alexander's death. And this has some implications for the Judeans. So, I've shown you this map, and I've shown you another map. This is the early map. And it says up here, Hellenistic kingdoms, about 301 BC, after the death of Alexander the Great. Well, really, this is before 301 BC. 301 BC is after the Greek Civil Wars. And that's what we're going to take a little look at the beginning of our lesson this morning. But notice, here's a Seleucid kingdom, Egyptian kingdom. This is Antigonus I. And up here is what would be considered Greece, or Greece, Macedonia, and Thrace. So it's divided into 4 parts, even though this section is kind of divided between Lysimachus and Cassander. They're the ruling people, or ruling generals. You have 4 main generals. So the major powers are Macedonia, Greece, Egypt, Syria. And that's, see, we're used to this area here being called Syria. But at this time, this whole area here is considered Syria in the Greeks' mind. This is more of Asia Minor. And make sure I get this kind of correct. Yeah, Syria, then Thrace, and Asia Minor proper here is under Antigonus. And in these early years, Judea is under Antigonus I. There are minor powers. Pergamum in Asia Minor. You don't see it so much here, but this southern area of Asia Minor was under a king who was under Antigonus, but it was pretty much independent. Rhodes, like some of these islands here, remain independent. Pontus, see where this area says Bithynia? And it may be here, or it may be in this area, south of the Black Sea, has not been fully taken. It's still pretty much independent. And then this area here is Parthia, on the southeast end of the Caspian Sea. Parthians are going to be the thorn in the side of the Romans later on in history. So that's the major setup that's going to take place in what's called the Greek Civil Wars. I haven't confused you. Okay, question?
What is that white area over here on the far right? What's
Here?
Yes.
Okay. This is the area of the Indus River. Here's the river coming up through here. And if you remember what happened, Alexander comes clear to here, takes this area. When he takes this area, he marries Roxanne. And when he comes down to take this area, his army rebels, or mutinies. And he has to come back to Susa, the capital. So this area he doesn't really take. He pulls back, leaves half of his army here to keep the Mora from coming back in, and sends the other half back to their homeland. So that's that area where there's going to be some tension in the future. Does that make sense? The area
where
that,
Pakistan is today.
yes. Yeah, Pakistan, Afghanistan sits up in this area. Iran up here, Iraq in here, well, over in here, Syria here. And there's your Persian Gulf. We're having a lot of trouble today.
Where would Gaza be now?
Gaza?
There, okay.
Okay, so this is more emblematic, not of 301, but of 316 BC. Because from 323 BC to 316 BC, you have a regency. Alexander died not having a legitimate heir to become the king or the next emperor. He had children by two different women, but the one, Roxanne was one of them, but because they didn't like Roxanne, the generals and such didn't like Roxanne, they weren't going to let her child be the emperor, and Roxanne, I believe, had the other wife's child killed. So there's no heir. So what he did, he left Perdiccas and Philip Aridaeus as regents. They were the ones who were going to control that vast empire. Now, imagine back in those days, he's at Susa, and that's where probably these regions are. How do you control that large of an empire if you're sending messengers out to control all this stuff? And now you've got these generals that are coming up, and they're getting political because they want power. So Perdiccas and Philip Aridaeus, they're able to control things for about 7 years. Controlling, keeping these generals in line. But around 315 BC, Alexander's armies, under the control of about 50 generals. That tells you he had about 50 armies all through this empire. We can understand that with our military. We've got armies stationed all over the place, and I don't know how many there are, but there are generals over them. And remember World War II, you had MacArthur with an army in the east. You had Eisenhower with an army in Europe, and Patton had an army, and they're just armies all over the place. And yeah, MacArthur was pretty political, wasn't he? In fact, he had aspirations of becoming president. I don't know how much of an aspiration Eisenhower had, but he eventually became president after the war. But of these 50 generals who are spread out, each one probably wanting some power, 4 prominent generals rise to power. So over in the far western part, which was where Athens, Sparta, all those cities are, you have Cassander, and that's Macedonia, the Greece, that area through there. Antigonus in Asia Minor, that comes down to and includes Judea, Palestine. Ptolemy is down in Egypt, and Seleucus of the Seleucids is in Syria, that whole big area over on the east. So that gives you an idea of the politics now that are taking place about 315 BC. This is the start of it, and this is where that Greek Civil War is going to take place. Why are we dealing with that? What's in the middle of it? Judea and Jerusalem. So, Antigonus I, who's also, look at that name, Monophthalmus. Monophthalmus. You know what that means?
Nothing to me.
One eye. For whatever reason, he only had one eye. But remember where he is the leader of? The general who's in charge of a whole big area? That was Asia Minor, wasn't it? Let's just drop back there. There's his area. And that includes Judea and Jerusalem. So he gets this idea that he wants to reestablish Alexander's empire. He wants to get control of the whole thing. He wants to be the next emperor. So what does he do? He starts attacking Cassander and Lysimachus up in Macedonia and Greece, going west, northwest, and Southwest, he's attacking Ptolemy in Egypt. Who's he not attacking? Seleucus, over in the east. Seleucus just kind of sits back. You all fight it out. You all fight it out among yourselves. I'm not going to worry about it. So, as a result, Cassander and Lysimachus of Macedonia, Greece, and Ptolemy of Egypt in 301 BC. Did we talk about the Battle of Issus before? Maybe not. But that's in 301 BC, and Issus is down there in the southern part of Asia Minor, which modern-day Turkey. So Antigonus one eye, is defeated. He loses his territory. And as a result of this, Judea comes under the rule of Ptolemy I, Soter of Egypt. This is at 301 BC. Here's Ptolemy I's kingdom. And see how it comes up to here, kind of halfway up. Here's Jerusalem and Judea. It comes under the control of Ptolemy. Greece and Thrace, Cassander and Lysimachus, they defeat, and Issus, I think it's down in this area. Here's that Pergamon, an independent state, so to speak. But this area becomes contested land. Now, Egypt and Syria are going to fight over this area for quite a while, for like another 100 years or so. But you see why Jerusalem and Judea are going to be affected by this. Greece, Thrace, this area, not so much. But look where the Seleucid Empire, once that battle takes place, now look what the Seleucids do under Seleucus Nicator. Well, he takes some territory, doesn't he? Because they're weakened, they're strengthened a little bit. Antagonist one is gone. So now you have four. One, two, three, four. Because now you've got a separation here, which didn't happen before. So this is the division of the Greek Empire after Alexander and after the Greek Civil War of 301 BC. All right. So there you had the major powers, you had the minor powers, the Regency, the Greek Civil War, Judea under Ptolemaic control. That's just where we're at in this particular area. Now, I want to get through this section pretty quick. This is going to take us through the Egyptian control over Judea. And then what we'll do when we come back next week, Lord willing, if we get through this, we'll come back with what starts with the Maccabeans. It's not really the Maccabeans, but pretty close to it. All right? Which will be a little more interesting. It's more focused on Judea and Jerusalem and the Jewish people. Right. So Judea is under Ptolemaic control from 301 BC to 198 BC. What's that? That's 103 years, pretty much. What's your mathematician? In 316, 315 BC, Ptolemy Soter joined the Greek Macedonians in war against Antigonus. Antigonus attacks the northwest, right? Ptolemy then attacks to help. So Antigonus has to fight on two sides. Seleucus, again, he's just playing it cool. In 312 BC, Ptolemy captured Jerusalem on a Sabbath day. According to Josephus in Antiquities, chapter 12, or book 12, chapter 1, verse 1, whatever. He did it on a Sabbath day. Why did he do it on a Sabbath day? The Jews refused to fight on a Sabbath day. So they just come in and took over Jerusalem. He forced or persuaded 100,000 Jews to accompany him to Egypt as colonists and or mercenaries. In other words, you're coming down here, you're going to live, and some of your men are going to be part of my army. A contingent of Jewish soldiers occupied the Elephantine Island in the Nile River. We talked about the Elephantine Island and the temple that was built on the Elephantine Island. Talked about that before. His treatment of them induced others to leave Syria for Egypt. Remember, there were large groups of Jews who lived from the time of Babylon in that far eastern part. There were a lot of synagogues through there. They didn't come back to Jerusalem after the exile was over. Example, Esther and Mordecai. There were others that continued to live in Babylon. Babylon's destroyed. What's the other? What's the other end? Oh man, that's awful. I don't have it written down. I don't remember. Anyway, when I just mentioned it. Persian Empire. So under the Persian Empire, they had a lot of freedom. When the Greeks come in, it changes. So when Ptolemy captures them and lets them colonize and have their own religion in Egypt, a lot of Jews leave what used to be Persia, now is called Syria, under the Seleucids. They come to Egypt and gather places like the Elephantine Island, Alexandria, Egypt, where the library is and a great center of learning. Most were sent to Alexandria, where a large contingent of Jews already resided. The Jewish temple was built at On, O-N, where the Egyptians worshiped the Greek sun god Helios, where we get that's kind of a word that falls into our language, isn't it? Helium, but Helios was a Greek god. Earlier, it had been like Ra. Ra was the Greek god of the sun. Or Ra was the Egyptian god of the sun. Helios is the Greek god of the sun. So you can see how those mesh. There was a temple there for that, but now this Jewish temple is allowed to be built there. Ecumenism, right? You can have your religion. one religion's as good as another. That's that Persian way of thinking. Here, so, they were permitted to maintain their religious and social customs. So, under C, a man by the name of Simon the Just was high priest for the initial Ptolemaic period, and probably from 310 to 260 BC. That's about 50 years of being a high priest. Well, why is that important? Because for the Jewish people, they didn't have a Jewish king, they didn't have a Jewish governor, so who was the leader of the Jewish people? The high priest. That's who they looked to for leadership. The Bible. The Bible. What's the difference between 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles?
Some of the two different covenants.
Same covenant, mostly the same information. One's being recorded by the kings, the other's being recorded by the priests. And that's why scholars want to split it up and say, well, see, there were two different groups. Here's the kingly group, and here's the priestly group. So you've actually got two different Bibles, and well, no, it's two different accounts, it's two different perspectives, but they're telling the same story.
It's kind of like the four Gospels, give four different viewpoints of the same information.
Yes, but who's supposed to be in control? Now think about it. Who's supposed to be in control? God's supposed to be in control, right? So, were the kings perfect? Were the high priests perfect? No. So there were good kings and bad kings. There were good high priests and there were bad high priests. So you get these differences in there. That's why you've got to read the Bible as a whole, not pick out parts. And listen, when you're reading it, it'll say something about a particular king or a particular person to say, and this is recorded in the book of blah, 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 blah. You can go back, you can find, if you had that book, you can go back and you read that. Somebody else is writing about that too. So the Holy Spirit is bringing that information into one book, one account, that's necessary for us, even today, to understand what's going on. We've got what we need. See what I'm saying? We've got to read it with a deeper than a cursory understanding of it. In other words, we've got to study it rather than just read it and, go on. Study it. Study a little deeper. Why is this like this? So, yeah, now we come down to here. You don't have any more kings yet in Judea, but you have a high priest, and that high priest is who people look to for guidance. And if he is a good high priest, things are going to go pretty well. If he's a bad high priest, things can fall apart pretty quickly. Well, that's what's going to happen. Simon the Just. What does that mean, the just? That sounds like he's a good high priest or a bad high priest? Sounds like he's a good high priest. Okay. So at 310, and the Civil War ends at 301. The Seleucids lose control. Ptolemy takes control. What's Ptolemy's attitude toward Jerusalem, Judea, and the Jewish people? You can have your religion. You can have your social customs. You can practice your religion. Great, right? Great. Opposite of the Seleucids, who still hold to the Greek, you have to have all the religions in your. See, in Egypt, you could worship all the religions, but in the Seleucid and the Greek, you had to worship all the gods. You had to accept all of them. And that's going to happen in the Roman Empire also. Follow me? But with the Egyptians, you're free to pick and choose. And that was great for the Jews. Great for Jerusalem and Judea. We have that understanding? So here's what he did. He's spoken of in the apocryphal books of Ecclesiasticus and 2nd Maccabees. Also the Mishnah and the book of Josephus, as we mentioned before. The Mishnah is the writings of the priests and scholars. You have, like the Mishnah, the Talmud, all these books where they're keeping an account. Here's what he did. He rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem. The wall that Nehemiah built had been destroyed. He rebuilt the wall. He repaired the temple that they built at the time of Zechariah and who was the other prophet? That's awful. They don't write these things down. Who was before Zechariah?
Nehemiah.
No, Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah come after. They're historical. Oh. Okay. Anyway. But they rebuilt the temple. They built the temple. Well, the temple was damaged. Now it's restored. He repairs the temple. He enlarged the reservoir of fresh water for Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem's up on a mountain. It's hard to get water up on a mountain unless it rains or snows. He provided reservoirs. So that why would they need water? If you're under siege, you need water. Water is a source of life. Now, during this period, two divergent groups developed in Judea. The house of Tobias was a pro-Egyptian party of wealthy Jews. Why does the Bible continually talk about wealthy people being I want to put it bad? Wealthy people being an avenue taking people away from God. That money is the root of all kinds of evil. Here's the example of it. The house of Tobias. These were rich people who said, we're all for Egyptian control. We don't want to be independent. We want them to rule over us and pay taxes so we can do business with them. And as long as they're controlling the area, we can do business with other parts of the world. It was totally like a business thing. Does that make sense?
Money is power.
Money is power.
Knowledge is power.
So it was a pro-Egyptian party of wealthy Jews, and it included public officials and tax collectors for the Egyptians. You want to know why tax collectors were considered sinners? Because they weren't for freedom. They were doing the work of people who wanted to keep control of them. Now, as much freedom as the Egyptians gave them, is that the blessing God wanted his people, that in quotation marks, his people to have in the promised land? So then you have the house of Onias. They refused to pay taxes to Egypt. Now, there are a host of other things that go along with this. When it comes to the time of Rome and the time of Jesus, same things going on. You have the Sadducees who love the Romans and want to be like the Romans. Later on, you have those that want to be like the Greeks, but they want to be like the Romans. And yeah, we'll pay taxes to the Romans, we'll do business with the Romans. All this is great. And then you have the ones who say, no, we want to be free. We want to live under God's rules. And they're willing, like the Zealots and Sicaries, to kill the Romans and to cause revolts. That's going to be continued in their history. This is the foundation of what happens in the Maccabean period. But you can see Simon was trying to get things going well for the children, for the Judeans. All right. I'm going to go quickly through these. I think this might be the last slide I have today. So, starting at 285. Okay, Ptolemy I Soter gave a lot of freedom to the Jews. Ptolemy II Philadelphus. What's Philadelphus mean? What's Philadelphia?
Love of brotherly love.
Brotherly love. What is that? He loved his brother. Who was his brother? Probably Ptolemy I, all right? But legend holds that Ptolemy II requested Eleazar, the chief priest of Jerusalem, to send translators to Alexandria to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. That resulted in the Septuagint version, the LXX version of the scriptures. We talked about that. The Septuagint version. That is so important for our understanding of scriptures today because it's translated from the Hebrew into the Greek, and that Greek language was spread across the whole world. That quite possibly is the Bible that Jesus was using, and that Jesus quoted from according to the New Testament. But that's a Septuagint version of the Old Testament. Ptolemy III, Eugertes, and eu means good, or pleasant, or pleasing, like eugenics. Boy, they got good genes. Well, Eugertes, I'm not sure what Gertes means. But Antiochus II of the Seleucid Kingdom left two ambitious mothers fighting to put the respective sons on the throne. Laodice, who had been banished, claimed Antiochus, named her son heir while on his deathbed. Berenice, Syra, Ptolemy II's daughter argued that her newly born son was the legitimate heir. Bernice asked her brother Ptolemy III to come to Antioch and help place her son on the throne. Before Ptolemy arrived, Laodice assassinated Berenice and her child, Antiochus III. Ptolemy declared war on Laodice's son, Seleucus II, in 246 BC. He briefly occupied Antioch, and forces even reached Babylon. He nearly cut the Seleucid kingdom in half. Antiochus III survives as Ptolemy is called home to 12 problems in Egypt. Some scholars believe Antiochus III is referred to in Daniel chapter 11, verses 5 through 9, and especially in verse 7. So that's why we mention him and what was happening with him. For the sake of time, we won't go to that passage today. But mind you, that's what scholars think. Ptolemy IV, down here, G. Philopator, left the stalker. Antiochus, the Battle of Raphia, June of 217 BC, near modern Rapha. Heard of Rapha? Rapha's where Biden's telling the Jews, Israel, not to go into today. Near modern Rapha. Ptolemy IV, Philopator, and Antiochus III of the Greek Seleucid Empire. It was one of the largest battles of the Hellenistic kingdoms and of the ancient world. It determined the sovereignty of Coel, Syria, and Judah. Remember that contested area I showed you on the map? And Judea. And that's probably talked about in Daniel chapter 11, verse 9. Then Ptolemy V, Epiphanes. Ptolemy V, Epiphanes. What does that mean? God manifests. He thought he was God made known. In 200 BC, Antiochus III defeated Ptolemy V Epiphanes at the Battle of Pamium and recaptured the Coel, Syria, and Judea. So now under whose control is Judea? Seleucid control. What's going to happen to their religious freedom? That's what we're going to be talking about, Lord willing, next week. But now, under a peace treaty, Ptolemy V married Antiochus III's daughter, Cleopatra I, in 194 BC. So his greatest accomplishment, this is Ptolemy V, was ordering the production of the Rosetta Stone. Have you heard of the Rosetta Stone? That was a stone that had the different languages on it that's now used to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics and the different languages that were used back in those days. Is that important to our studies today, even of the Bible? Yes. Oops. Get on the right page. So now, 110 years of unremarkable leadership. They've lost Judah and Judea, Jerusalem and Judea are now under the control of the Seleucids. Yeah, there's going to be some fighting between the army of the north, that's the Seleucids, and the armies of the south, that's the Egyptians. But the Seleucids are going to remain in control of the promised land. 110 years. Nobody really comes up in the Egyptian kingdom that does anything remarkable. I'll put it that way. But we do mention Cleopatra. She was born about 70 or 69 BC and died in 30 BC. She was the last Egyptian queen. The Egyptian queen left over from the Grecian Empire. She was deeply involved in the geopolitics of that era. She's the Cleopatra that we talk about today. She's the one that the movies are made about. She was the lover of Julius Caesar and became the wife of Mark Antony. She became queen on the death of her father, Ptolemy 12 in 51 BC. She co-ruled with her two brothers, Ptolemy 13 and Ptolemy 14, and her son, Ptolemy 15, down to 30 BC. After the Roman armies of Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces, because what's going on? You're having a Roman civil war also. What happened to Julius Caesar? They assassinated him. There's a civil war that takes place, and Octavian, who I believe is then Augustus Caesar, finally gets control, and the last vestiges to be defeated are Antony and Cleopatra's forces. After they're defeated, then Antony and Cleopatra commit suicide, and Egypt falls under Roman domination. So that takes us all through that period from the Greek Civil War. You still got a little bit of the Seleucids going on. It's going to take a while for the Romans to quell them. But now the Romans take Greece, Asia Minor, they get this. Now we're going to be set up to where we can go back and we will start looking at the Seleucids ruling over Judea and Jerusalem in that time period of the Maccabees. And we will have to deal with this too much. Maybe make a few references in it, but it's going to be gone. Fair enough? Boring enough? No. I know. We're going through it quickly, but, and there isn't too much here. But you can see there's biblical stuff in here. Right. Can we stop for today? All right. Thank you for your time and your attention. Class is